The things we saw before we learned how to lie. Story 1. My imaginary friend had one rule. My name is Leo, and when I was 7 years old, my best friend lived in my bedroom. His name was Mr. Fingers, and he lived in the dark, narrow gap between my closet and the wall. My parents thought it was cute. What a great imagination, my mom would say. They'd ask me what he looked like, and I'd just shrug. I'd never seen him. I wasn't allowed to. That was his only rule. "You can talk to me, Leo," he'd whisper from the gap at night, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "You can play with me, but you must never, ever look at my face." During the day, he was quiet, but at night, he'd come out to play. I'd lie in my bed, facing the wall, my eyes squeezed shut as I heard the faint shuffling sound of him sliding out of the gap. Our games were simple at first. He'd ask me to count to 100 while he hid one of my toys. I'd find it the next morning in a weird place, like inside my dad's shoe or on top of the fridge. It was fun. But after a few weeks, the game started to change. "Leo," he whispered one night, his voice closer than usual. "I want to play a new game. Go into your parents' room and stand by their bed. Just watch them sleep until the sun comes up. Don't let them see you." I was scared, but the thought of disappointing Mr. Fingers was even scarier. So I did it. I stood there for hours in the dark, a silent little statue, my heart pounding every time my dad snored. When I crept back to my room as the sky turned gray, I heard Mr. Fingers' dry whisper from the gap. "You did so well, Leo. We'll play again tomorrow." The games got worse. He asked me to unlock the back door before I went to bed. He asked me to bring him one of the shiny knives from the kitchen drawer. I'd leave it on the floor for him, and in the morning it would be gone. I was terrified, but I was 7, and this was my only friend. I didn't want him to leave. The last game we ever played was called hide and seek in the storm. A big thunderstorm was raging outside. The power had gone out, and my parents had given me a battery-powered lantern. I was huddled under my covers when Mr. Fingers whispered, "Let's play, Leo. I'll hide. You seek." "I can't," I whispered back, my voice trembling. "It's too dark." "Use your lamp, Leo," he hissed, a new impatience in his voice. "Find me, or I'll find you." I heard him shuffle out of the gap and into the room. The house groaned under the force of the wind. A huge clap of thunder shook the windows, and I flinched, my hand hitting the lantern on my nightstand. It tumbled to the floor, the switch clicking on as it hit. The beam of light flooded the room, pointing directly at the space in front of my bed, and for the first time, I broke the rule. I saw Mr. Fingers' face. It wasn't a face. Not really. Where his head should have been, there was a pale, gray hand. It was like one of my dad's old leather gloves, but the fingers were too long, too thin, and there were 7 or 8 of them, all writhing slowly like worms. And in the center of the palm, where a mouth should be, there was just a dark, wet hole that pulsed as it made a soft clicking sound. It froze in the fingers stopped. The clicking sound in its palm mouth ceased, and then all the fingers curled into a tight fist, and it lunged at me. I don't remember my own scream, but my dad said he'd never heard a sound like it. He burst into the room a second later to find me hysterical, the lantern flickering on the floor. There was nothing else in the room. Mr. Fingers was gone. They never believed me. Of course, it was a nightmare, they said. A night terror brought on by the storm. But when my mom cleaned my room the next day, she found something on the wall behind my headboard. A greasy, gray handprint. It had 7 fingers. That handprint changed everything. My parents' easy dismissal of my night terrors shattered against that impossible physical proof. My mom tried to scrub it off the wall, but it wouldn't fade. It was as if the wall itself was stained with the memory of that touch. The nights that followed were worse. I refused to sleep in my room. From the hallway, we could hear things. A soft, dry shuffling from the closet. Then whispers. Faint, rustling whispers that seemed to slither out from under the door. The worst part was my own sleep. I'd talk, my parents told me. I'd sit up in bed, my eyes wide open but seeing nothing. And I'd have a full conversation with someone who wasn't there, reciting the rules to a game I didn't remember. My father was a practical man, not religious. But after a week of this, after finding me standing in the doorway of their bedroom at 3 a.m., just watching them sleep with a terrifyingly blank smile, he made a call. He brought in a priest. Not our local parish priest, but an older, tired-looking man from a diocese 2 states away. A specialist, they called him. His name was Father Michael. He didn't carry a Bible when he entered my room, just a small leather satchel. He stood in the center of the room, closed his eyes, and just listened for a long time. Then he walked directly to the wall and placed his own hand over the 7-fingered print. He recoiled as if burned. That evening, he sat my parents and me down in the kitchen. "What you have in this house," he said, his voice low and heavy, "is ancient. It has many names in many cultures, but the old texts call it Malakoda Delset Dita, the demon with 7 fingers." I watched my father's face turn pale. "It is a parasite of a unique kind," the priest continued, his eyes fixed on me. "It is drawn to the purity of children, using their innocence as a key. It enters a home through games, through secrets, building trust in the dark. But the child is not the target. The child is the doorway." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Its true goal is the parents. It studies them through the child's eyes. It learns their habits, their fears, and when the bond is strong enough, it waits for them to sleep. It enters their dreams, and from that unguarded place, it consumes their souls and takes root in their bodies. The child is left an orphan, and the demon has a new home, new faces to wear." A cold, absolute horror filled the room. The memory of me standing in their doorway, watching them sleep. It hadn't been me. I had been its eyes. Father Michael performed the cleansing. It wasn't like the movies. There was no screaming or levitation. It was a quiet, brutal war. As he chanted in Latin, The temperature in the house plummeted. Every door in the house slammed shut at once. The whispers from my room became a chorus of hateful guttural hisses. The priest never flinched. He finished the rite. And as the last word left his lips, a single
Furious bang echoed from inside my closet like a heavy piece of furniture being thrown against the door, and then
silence. "It is gone," Father Michael said, wiping sweat from his brow. "From you, from this family, but it is not destroyed. A thing like that is bound to the place, to the earth it has claimed. You will never be safe in this house. We were gone within a week. My parents sold the house for a fraction of its worth to a company that didn't ask questions. We moved over 2,000 miles away. We never spoke of Mr. Fingers again. They say the house is still standing, somewhere deep in the unsettlingly quiet hills of rural Pennsylvania. It's been bought and sold a few times over the years. I heard the most recent family that moved in, they have a young son. I just pray he doesn't like to play games in the dark. Story 2. The thing that lived in my grandma's basement. My name is Thomas, and I spent every summer of my childhood at my Grandma Rose's house in the countryside. It was the kind of idyllic place you read about in books. A sprawling farmhouse that smelled like cinnamon and old wood, with acres of fields to run through. My grandmother was the kindest person I've ever known. She'd bake pies, tell me stories, and let me stay up late. But she had one single unbreakable rule. I was never, under any circumstances, to go near the basement door. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command delivered with a fear in her eyes so real and profound that I never even thought to question it. The door was at the end of the main hall, made of thick, dark wood, and secured with not one, but 3 heavy brass deadbolts. It's just full of mold and bad pipes. "Tommy," she'd say, her voice a little too cheerful. "It's not safe down there." For years, I accepted that. The basement was just a place we didn't go. But the summer I turned 9, I started to hear things. It started as a faint melody. I was playing with my toy soldiers in the hall when I first heard it. A soft, beautiful humming, like a woman singing a lullaby. It was coming from the direction of the basement door. I crept closer, my heart thumping. The melody was sweet, enchanting, and it seemed to be coming from right behind the wood. The next day, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just humming. It was a voice as sweet as honey, and it was singing my name. Tommy, it sang, the sound muffled but clear. "Come play with me, Tommy. It's so lonely down here." I ran to my grandmother, telling her there was a lady trapped in the basement. The color drained from her face. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me into the living room. "There is no one down there," she said, her voice a harsh whisper. "It's the pipes. They're old. They make strange noises. Do you understand me?" I nodded, but I didn't understand. The pipes didn't know my name. The voice became my secret. Every day, when my grandma was napping, I would sneak to the basement door and listen. It would talk to me. It knew things. It knew my favorite toy was a blue spaceship I'd lost last summer. "I have your spaceship, Tommy," the voice cooed one afternoon. "It's right down here at the bottom of the stairs. If you come down, you can have it back." I was so tempted, my hand hovered over the top deadbolt. But the image of the fear in my grandma's eyes always stopped me. The last week of that summer, a heat wave hit. One afternoon, my grandma was fast asleep in her armchair, overcome by the heat. I was in the hall, sweating, when the voice came again, more desperate this time. "Tommy, please," it whispered. "Your grandmother is just afraid of the dark. There's nothing to be scared of. I'm your friend." Then it began to hum the same lullaby my mother used to sing to me, a song it had no way of knowing. That was it. My curiosity finally won. My grandma kept the keys on a high hook in the kitchen. My hands shaking, I pulled a chair over, climbed up, and unhooked the heavy brass ring. There were 3 keys. I tiptoed back to the door. One by one, I inserted the keys. The sound of each deadbolt retracting felt like a cannon shot in the silent house. Click, click. I put my hand on the cold brass doorknob and turned. The door swung open with a low groan, revealing a wall of absolute, impenetrable darkness. The air that wafted out was cold, damp, and smelled of wet earth and something sickly sweet. "Hello," I whispered into the blackness, my voice trembling. The sweet voice answered immediately, right from the bottom of the unseen stairs. "Oh, Tommy, I'm so glad you came. Come down. Come see me." I took a hesitant step forward, peering into the void, but I couldn't see a thing. "I can't see you," I said. A soft chuckle echoed from the darkness. "You don't need to see me. We can just talk." And then the voice was joined by another, a man's voice, whispering from the left, "He's here." And another, a little girl, from the right. He finally came. Soon, dozens of whispers were rising from the darkness, a chorus of ghostly voices, all murmuring and shuffling in the pitch black below. The sweet voice was just one of many, and that's when I heard the real sound of terror. The sound of my grandmother screaming my name from the living room. She had woken up. I slammed the heavy door shut, just as something massive and heavy thudded against it from the other side, shaking the entire doorframe. I fumbled with the locks, my fingers slipping, managing to turn the deadbolts just as another, more violent slam rattled the door. My grandma pulled me away, her face a mask of pure horror. She never spoke of it again. We packed our bags and left the next day, cutting the summer short. It was the last time I ever visited her house. She passed away a few years ago, and the house was left to me. I'm an adult now. I went back last month just to see it. The house was just as I remembered, and at the end of the hall, the basement door was still there, still locked with 3 heavy brass deadbolts. As I stood before it, I could almost hear it, a faint, sweet melody drifting up from the darkness within, from the darkness within. It was the last time I ever visited her house. That incident never left me. It became a dark cornerstone in the architecture of my memory. For years, was in college studying history. I used my access to academic archives and old digital newspaper records to start digging. I became obsessed. I researched the history of that small rural town, of the specific plot of land my grandmother's house was built on. I found what I was looking for, not in one place, but scattered across a century of forgotten records. The farmhouse hadn't been the first building on that property. A small, self-sufficient community had been there in the late 1800s, a settlement that was erased from the maps after a so-called diphtheria outbreak wiped out every man, woman, and child, or so the official records claimed. But the local folklore, the stories passed down in hushed tones, told a different tale. They spoke of the singing mimic or the collector of voices. They described a thing that lived in the earth, an entity that could replicate any sound it heard, from a beautiful lullaby to the voice of a lost loved one. It was a lure, a trap for the lonely and the curious. The legends said it drew people into its subterranean den, and once it had them, it would add their voice to its ever-growing horrific chorus. Then I found them. 3 separate newspaper clippings. One from 1912, one from 1954, and one from 1978. Each detailed the mysterious disappearance of a child. All from the same remote area, all from the same plot of land. They had all, according to their families, been talking to a new, secret friend. Just before they vanished, my blood ran cold. My grandmother hadn't just been afraid. She had been a warden. She was the guardian of a prison, and its only door was the one in her hallway, secured with 3 brass DEADS. She passed away 2 years ago. In her will, she left the house to me, along with a single, sealed manila envelope. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, there were no legal documents, just a heavy ring with the 3 brass keys and a short, terrifying letter, written in her shaky, elderly script. It said, "I'm sorry, Tommy. I'm too old and tired to keep listening. Now it's your turn. The whispers will start soon. Whatever you do, don't let it out. I own the house now. I am its keeper. I drive out there once a month to make sure the locks are still secure, to make sure the wood on the door isn't rotting. I never stay the night, but every time I stand in that silent hallway, my hand resting on the cold brass locks, I hear it. It starts faint, a sweet and beautiful melody drifting up from the darkness within. It still remembers the lullaby my mother used to sing to me, and it still calls my name, my name." Story 3. The boy who lived in my wall. My name is Clara, and my life changed the year I turned 8. The year we moved into the house on Hemlock Lane. It was a big, old house, the kind my parents had always dreamed of, with creaky floors and a history they found charming. For me, it was a prison. I had left all my friends behind, and now my world was a labyrinth of unfamiliar rooms and the suffocating silence of a town where I knew no one. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor. It had a strange, unsettling wallpaper of faded yellow roses whose twisting thorns looked like tiny, screaming faces if you stared at them for too long. My bed was pushed against the west wall, a long, uninterrupted stretch of plaster that my parents told me was shared with an old sealed-off pantry. The loneliness of that first week was a physical ache. At night, it was the worst. That's when I first heard the scratching. It was faint, a dry, scurrying sound from inside the west wall, right behind my headboard. "That's just the house mice, sweetie," my dad had said with a smile. But a few nights later, the sound changed. It wasn't scratching anymore. It was a whisper. It was the voice of a boy. "Hello," he whispered, his voice seeming to come from the very plaster of the wall. "Are you new?" I was frozen. I slowly leaned my head closer to the cold wall. "Who are you?" I whispered back. "My name is Samuel," the voice replied. "I live in here. It's been so quiet for so long." And just like that, I wasn't lonely anymore. Samuel became my secret. Every night, we would talk for hours. He was my only friend. He was funny, and he knew everything about the house. He told me which floorboard creaked the loudest, and about the nest of baby birds outside the attic window. One night, I asked him, "Samuel, why can't you ever come out and play?" The wall went silent. When he finally answered, his whisper was colder. "I can't. The door is gone. They took it away." A chill went down my spine. "What do you eat?" I asked. "I eat the bad dreams," he whispered. "The ones that float out of your head when you're asleep. They're like candy to me." I didn't know what that meant. I tried to change the subject, telling him about a boy at my new school, a bully named Michael who had pushed me down. I was crying a little as I told him. The wall was silent again. Then, Samuel's whisper came back, but it had a sharp, hungry edge to it. "What's his name?" "Clara." "Michael," I sobbed. "Don't worry," Samuel whispered, his voice suddenly soothing. "Go to sleep. I'll take care of it." The next day at school, an ambulance was on the playground. Michael had fallen from the top of the monkey bars. The teacher said it was a terrible accident. He had 2 broken arms. That night, I pretended to be asleep, but I could hear Samuel's excited whisper through the wall. "Clara, are you awake?" I did it. "He won't bother you anymore. I visited him last night, and I ate his bad dream. It was the most delicious one I've ever had." Asterisk, I stopped talking to the wall after that. The nights became a new kind of torture. Before, the silence had been lonely. Now, it was a thin sheet of ice I was afraid to break. I would lie in my bed, facing away from the west wall, my body as stiff as a board, pretending to be in the deepest sleep imaginable. But he knew I was awake. "Tara," his whisper would begin, a venomous little dart in the darkness. "Why won't you talk to me? I miss you." When the pleading didn't work, the anger would start. The gentle scratching was replaced by a furious clawing, the sound of splintered fingernails dragging down the inside of the wall for hours. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My parents grew concerned. They saw the dark circles under my eyes, the way I flinched at every sudden noise. They took explanation of a sealed pantry no longer made any sense. The answer was in the attic. One Saturday, I climbed into the hot, stuffy darkness. In an old steamer trunk, I found a box of old sepia-toned photographs and a small, leather-bound diary. The photographs were of the house, taken nearly a century ago. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the picture of the second floor. My bedroom window wasn't there. The west wall was just an exterior wall. My room hadn't existed. I opened the diary. It belonged to a woman named Elspeth, who had lived in the house in the 1920s. She wrote about her life, her husband, and her son, her sickly, quiet son, who was confined to his room on the second floor. His name was Samuel. My blood ran cold. I kept reading. Elspeth wrote about Samuel's loneliness, and then about the new friend he had started talking to. A friend, he said, lived inside the walls, but her entries grew darker. She wrote that Samuel was changing, saying terrible things. He claimed his friend, the shadow in the wall, would eat the bad dreams of his enemies. The last entry in the diary was barely legible. The ink splotched as if by tears. Samuel is gone. It is not my son in that room anymore. The thing he spoke to has worn his voice like a coat. It whispers to us at night from his bed, scratching at the walls, trying to find a way out. Tomorrow, my husband brings the plaster and the boards. We are not just sealing a room. We are building a tomb. I slammed the diary shut. Samuel wasn't the ghost. He was the first victim. I was talking to the thing that had taken him. That night, the scratching in my wall was more frantic than ever. Then, just after midnight, it stopped. The sudden silence was somehow worse. A new sound began. It was not a whisper. It was not a scratch. It was the slow, deliberate splintering sound of a single, rusty nailhead pushing its way through the plaster of the wall right next to my pillow. Asterisk, my pillow. The sound of the metal nailhead scratching through the plaster so close to my head was the catalyst that broke my paralysis. The scream that tore from my throat didn't sound like my own. It was a sharp, primitive shriek of pure terror that finally shattered my parents' disbelief. My bedroom door flew open. My father burst in, my mother close behind him, their faces a mixture of annoyance and concern. "Clara, what is it? Was it a nightmare?" I couldn't form words. I could only raise a trembling arm and point to the wall beside my bed. My father frowned, moving closer. "What? There's nothing, TH. He stopped. His eyes narrowed. The nail, or whatever it had been, had retracted, but it left a small, ugly wound in the wallpaper, a hole from which a fine trickle of plaster dust was falling. And as we watched in tense silence, the sound began again. A slow, deliberate scratching from within the wall. It was an undeniable sound, real. My mother choked back a sob and retreated, but my father, he stood his ground, his face hardening. Confusion gave way to a protective fury. He refused to be afraid in his own house. "It's rats," he said, his voice strained, trying to convince himself as us. "Damn rats, bigger than I thought. Rats, don't whisper," I cried, the words finally tumbling out. His name is Samuel. I told you. My father ignored me. He pressed his ear against the wall. The scratching stopped, and in the silence that followed, we all heard it, a whisper, as clear as if it were standing between us. A single word, mimicking the voice of a small boy. Hello. That was the end of my father's denial. He recoiled from the wall, as if he'd been shocked, his face pale. For an hour, we sat in the living room, my bedroom door shut, as the scratching and the occasional whispers continued. My mother was crying, insisting we had to leave, go to a hotel, anywhere, but my father refused. His fear had transformed into a stubborn, furious resolve. Nothing is chasing me out of my own house, he snarled. He stood and walked to the garage. He returned with a sledgehammer, his face set in a mask of determination. Robert, no, my mother pleaded. You don't know what it is. I'm about to find out, he answered, and he walked down the hall to my room. The first blow of the sledgehammer against the wall sounded like an explosion. Plaster cracked. The second blow punched a hole, revealing the old wooden lath beneath. With every impact, the tension in the house grew thicker, almost unbearable. The whispers from inside the walls stopped. Now, there was an expectant silence. Finally, with a splintering crunch of old wood, a large section of the wall collapsed inward, opening a dark, yawning hole. A smell poured out of the opening, a scent of stale air, of century-old dust, of sickness, and of something else, something faintly metallic, like dried blood. My father aimed his flashlight inside. The beam cut through the darkness and revealed not a pantry, but a room. A tomb dot. It was a child's bedroom, frozen in time. A small, iron-frame bed with a rotted, stained mattress. An overturned wooden horse. A few marbles scattered on the floor. Everything was covered in a thick, pristine blanket of gray dust that muffled everything, giving the scene a ghostly unreality. The room was empty of life. There was no skeleton, no monster huddled in the corner. See? My father said, his voice trembling with relief. There's nothing. But I wasn't looking at the room. I was looking at the walls. They were covered in drawings, childish scribbles done in charcoal. We moved closer cautiously, peering through the hole. The drawings told a story. The first showed a smiling stick-figure family in front of the house. The second was a boy alone in a bed. Underneath the word, me. The third showed the same boy, but standing beside him was a tall, smudgy figure. A shadow man with arms and legs that were too long. The caption read, "My new friend." The next drawing showed the two of them, the boy and the shadow, holding hands. But the boy's smiling face had been furiously scribbled over, replaced with a blank, empty circle. And then the last drawing. It was alone on the far wall. It was just the shadow figure, tall and solitary in the center of the page, its limbs like a spider's. It had no face, but you could feel it was looking. Underneath, in messy, childish script, was a sentence. "Samuel is all better now. He is with me." My mother choked on a sob, finally understanding. Samuel was wasn't the ghost. Samuel had been the first victim at that moment. As my father still held the flashlight on that last horrible drawing, we heard a whisper. It did not come from the hole in the wall. It did not come from Samuel's tomb. It came from the wall behind us. The wall that connected to my parents' bedroom. It was the voice of a little boy, mimicking my mother's sob perfectly. And then it said one word: friends. The realization hit us with the force of a physical blow. It was never trapped in that room. The room was just its nest, its anchor point. The entire house was its body. It could move between all the spaces. We didn't scream. There was no time. Instinct took over. We ran from that room, down the hall, down the stairs, not looking back. My father didn't stop for anything but the car keys. We burst out into the night, leaving the front door wide open, the contents of our lives abandoned without a second thought. As my father started the car, I looked back at the house. The porch light illuminated a normal facade, except for the dark, ugly hole on the second floor, which looked like a gaping mouth in a silent scream. We never went back. The house stood empty for years, a scar on the neighborhood, until it was finally condemned and torn down. But I know you can't kill an echo just by tearing down the walls that contain it. I'm an adult now. I live in a city, in a high-rise apartment. But some nights, when the silence is too deep, I find myself getting out of bed. I walk to the wall. I share with my neighbor a place where there should be the sound of a television or a conversation. I press my ear to the cold plaster, holding my breath, and sometimes I hear it, a scratching sound, faint, dry, and familiar. You can tear down the house, but you can never get rid of the spaces in between. A thing with 7 fingers that plays a child's game. A chorus of voices that sings a sweet lullaby. A shadow in the wall that promises friendship. 3 stories, but the same terrifying signal. There is a reason the fears of childhood are the ones that never truly leave us. It is because they are the most honest. A child's eyes have no filter for disbelief. They see what is truly there, in the dark gap by the closet, in the cold air from the basement, in the space between the walls. We are taught to forget, to build walls of reason and logic around those memories, dismissing them as nightmares or fantasies. But the most terrifying truth is this: the things you were afraid of as a child never went away. They simply learned to wait patiently in the static of your forgotten memories. For a moment, when you feel lonely and scared once again, we archive these transmissions as a warning. Subscribe to the panic frequency and keep this signal alive. Do not allow the silence to make you forget what you once knew to be real. Until our next broadcast, remember, the next time you feel like you are being watched, you are